Welcome to Becoming a Resonance Healer. My name is Gadu. Thank you so much for joining us. Today I would like to start talking about Doushin resonance. As I mentioned before, I believe one of the most important skills for a healer to have is an intuitive sense. But what is intuition? Intuition is when our conscious mind recognize subtle information and subtle connection or subtle resonance, and that's when we call it intuition, because it may or may not have a logical, existence or rational existence, but it's kind of just pop up. But the information is already there because everything is a form of information. So it's just a matter of how to access this information. And in our resonance healer training program, we use Doushin resonance technique to increase this ability, gain our sensitivity to subtle resonance and subtle information. So this practice, Doushin resonance, came from my 30 years of practice in movement, and also about 20 years of practice in healing. So I combined them all together and created this program. In general, the many practice focus on their third eye or upper tanden for intuition. But in my opinion, the upper tanden and your third eye is just a gateway for information. We can call it like a antenna or a Wi-Fi connection. But then if the information comes, because there's so much information out there, if we don't know how to process the information and choose what information you need for this particular situation, the information itself is kind of useless. I used computer analogy, even if there is information, if you have a strong Wi-Fi connection, you can download all sorts of information. But if there is no power source, if there's a proper power source to run the computer, it's not going to work. And you need to have a right operating system and also software to run this, to use this information. And also you need to have a wisdom and intelligence to know which one to use. Which information to use for this particular situation. And that's our kokoro. So we need to train all sorts of a different part of our body. And by training our body for sensitivity and also training our mind, and that's how we can use this information. So we need to increase sensitivity in every part of our body. And we use mindfulness to activate this awareness. And we also need to use mindful movement to activate different part of body. Because usually in our daily life, we only use certain part of our body. And we need to surrender ourselves to this natural flow and natural information, letting go of our ego, and our attachment in order to download all this information. And we open ourselves to subtle resonance, subtle sensation. Sometimes we use chanting, and the vibration to make ourselves sensitive to those different type of vibration too. And we need to, acquire this wisdom by opening our kokoro and understanding who we are and what we are with unconditional love. And we refine our E to activate right ki, for our healing and for healing for others too. So in our daily Doushin resonance practice, we have different classes to focus on different aspects of Doushin resonance. So we have a mindful resonance class, resonance flow class, sympathetic resonance class, and refined resonance class, and subtle resonance class. So every day we have a different course, different class to focus on different things. So next few weeks we're going to talk about this.